What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at the match between Chelsea and Manchester City in the English Premier League. And before we get into the tactics behind the match, check out both my books. They're online on Amazon and there's links in the description below. Also, be sure to check out Keyframe. It's how I'm making this video, and there's a link to that in the description as well. So we're going to start off by looking at Chelsea's defensive structure, and this really clear picture here. There you go with their normal back five after a short bout of a 4-4-2 in the Carabao Cup, but going with a back five defensively and deeper in their own half, they go with a four-man midfield and creating a 5-4-1 with Lukaku at the center forward position, covering Rodri, who's the single pivot, and ahead of him he has the three attacking midfield players forming an asymmetric midfield diamond as Manchester City have been using throughout most of the season. Now Manchester City also go with their back four, which is very typical from them, and they use their wingers to hold the width of Jack Grealish, and in this case it's Kyle Walker holding the width with Bernardo Silva dropping deeper. So this positional fluidity from these players gave Chelsea a lot of trouble because they have so many different ways of occupying this structure and using players' strengths in these areas to then hurt Chelsea. And now we can look at how important the wide structures are with Jack Grealish here holding the full width as the winger. We have Cancelo inverted into a narrow positioning, creating a strong W rest defense shape against the rest attacking shape of the 2-3 of Chelsea. Then we also have here De Bruyne on this left hand side, so he's cutting in on his right foot, which is how he scored the goal and how Man City won 1-0. So these wide structures for Manchester City and their movement is crucial to how they play, and oftentimes it's these three players in the wide structures moving in and out of these positions to maintain their structure and control over the match when in possession, but it's also this movement that unorganizes Chelsea's defense and creates this space in behind where then they can make vertical runs to then access this space and exploit the high line of Chelsea. Now moving at a different camera angle, now we have the same shape with Bernardo Silva dropping. Now Raheem Sterling moves inward as we talked about positional fluidity. Kyle Walker still holding the full width, and now we have a different group of players occupying this diamond shape. So with Raheem Sterling inverting, we still hold the width with Kyle Walker, as we said, brings different aspects between the lines. Chelsea defensive setup look to use their cover shadows to block access to the holding midfielder and use the cover shadow of the two wider midfielders or inside wingers block access to the interior midfielders of Manchester City. They were then supported by Kovacic and Conte, who would split and create dual roles defensively against the Manchester City players. So by positioning themselves between attackers of Manchester City, this gives them multiple access points to dangerous players, which allows them to overcome Manchester City's numerical superiority. Now earlier on in the game and at moments in the second half, we would see Kyle Walker come deeper, almost forming a makeshift back three with Rodri still as the single pivot, and this would give them more passing options from deeper areas and into more advanced space. Then we see now Phil Foden playing the false nine role and really was effective when the two defensive midfielders of Chelsea were dragged out wide towards the attacking midfielders of Manchester City. So when this would happen, the space would be created for Phil Foden to then look to receive a vertical pass from his defenders. With Bernardo Silva in the team, he comes with a very versatile player profile, and often we would see him come alongside Rodri deeper in the half space, which would allow Raheem Sterling to invert and Kyle Walker to overlap, and would still create three players between the lines for Manchester City when Raheem Sterling would invert, but it gives more security and it elicits more jumping from the Chelsea players and attracts more pressure around the double pivot now and releases space between the lines for players like Phil Foden to come outward or Raheem Sterling to come inward. So as we see here, the Chelsea midfield is drawn a bit forward, increasing the space between the lines, forcing the central defenders to make more decisions on whether they should jump or hold their position. Now against the low block of Chelsea, Manchester City would play much more narrow in their fullbacks and try and decrease the amount of space the ball had to travel across when circulating possession. They also had Rodri as a single pivot, and this time De Bruyne is dropping deeper to then form the double pivot and add security into Manchester City's attacking against the low block. Then we would see inverting from Jack Grealish with Cancelo occupying the wide area and still maintaining this overload between the lines. The double pivot for Chelsea staggered themselves to deal with this overload and staggering of the Manchester City attackers between the lines, where the front three of Chelsea become very deep, controlling the double pivot of Manchester City, and the two wide players would drop back and create a 5-4-1, a very robust low block to limit the amount of space Manchester City were able to create. Manchester City didn't allow Chelsea to have as much structured possession, and Manchester City really controlled the game. But when Chelsea did try and build from the back, they would create the right-sided overload, as we typically always see, with Kepa splitting the most central defender and the left center back, with then Rudiger, who's the right center back, going into the right-sided wide area. And now the double pivot would stagger themselves, entering the half space, where Conte is very useful, and he often would try and act as a focal point and a connecting point into the wide area for the wingers and the wing backs to then receive the ball. Kovacic was the lone pivot in this situation, giving Conte more freedom further forward. Chelsea didn't have a way out when Manchester City would press, and this was typically because of the high pressing volume that Manchester City used. So Phil Foden would look to use his cover shadow with Raheem Sterling inverting to then create access to the double pivot. Bernardo Silva looking to go across, with then Kevin De Bruyne just off our screen. So the man orientation and the intensity at which Manchester City used didn't allow Chelsea a way out when they were trying to build from the back. Now we see here a clear 4-2-3-1 with Bernardo Silva joining Rodri, Jack Grealish, and Sterling either side of De Bruyne, with Phil Foden splitting the field and denying circulation. Now when Chelsea were in possession higher up the field, they went with their back three and two holding midfielders. This was very well adjusted to the 4-2-3-1 of Manchester City, because when they would go and press the wide central defender, it would create a natural cover shadow to block access to the near-sided holding midfielder. Then the horizontal compactness of these three players gave them numerical superiority against the double pivot, which made them very ineffective throughout the match. So it would typically force the ball into the wide area, where then Manchester City could isolate possession and win the ball back. And that's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.